Okay, as soon as Dottie sits down, we'll start. So I had to bring my phone because I have some notes. A lot of new stuff happened after I got here tonight. One, we had a lot more people for dinner, so everybody took my advice. No, I'm not wearing the shorts. It's got to get, if it hits 100, I'll wear the shorts, no matter what she says. So first of all, I'm glad more of you came for dinner. It was great. I didn't know there were going to be mushrooms in the chicken lasagna, but that's all right. You can pick those out. But the most important thing, other than our speaker, is I found out right before dinner that Friday, where's Richard? Is Richard's birthday. So we all need to say happy birthday to Richard Stanford. I think he's going to be 50-something. So I was thinking about what I was going to say tonight. And, with all this stuff going on with the economy and everything else, I don't really get very upset about too much stuff. I mean, gas is $5. Okay, gas is $5. Your 401k is trying to turn into your 201k. That's a little more important and a little more upsetting. I read something in the paper this morning or online at the morning news that maybe next January Social Security check is going to be about 8% more. Well, that's going to help a ton, isn't it? But there is one thing I found out this week that really got me spun up. And it's the fact that Trader Joe's has discontinued dill pickle popcorn. Now, I don't know, I'm probably the only one in this room that's ever had Trader Joe's dill pickle popcorn. But I'm telling you right now, it is the best popcorn you can ever put in your mouth. And it usually comes out at the beginning of the summer, so I was kind of excited. It's 1st of June. I'll go to Trader Joe's. I'm sure it'll be there right on an end cap, and I'll buy 12 or 15 bags of it. So I didn't find it, and I went to the checkout thing with my stuff, and I said, when are you guys going to get the dill pickle popcorn? And she's like, oh, I got some bad news for you. I said, what? She said, when they discontinued dill pickle popcorn. I said, where's the manager? We have to talk about this. Well, I don't know if it's whatever. Supply chain issues, who knows what. But there is no more dill pickle popcorn at Trader Joe's, so I'm really mad about that. But having said that, we're all glad you're here. We have a huge crowd tonight. So I am going to introduce Hannah Buchanan, who's going to do everything. She's going to welcome us a little more than I have and give our invocation and introduce our speaker. So here's Hannah.
I feel your pain about Trader Joe's discontinuing things right when they reach their peak. Like the autumn leaf cookies. You have to get those right when they're unpacked from the box. Otherwise, they're gone. All right. Well, I'm Hannah Buchanan. I'm one of the pastors here at Highland Park United Methodist in this Cornerstone community. I had the opportunity to meet our former senior minister, Mark Craig, once at our current senior minister's 50th birthday party. It was a memorable experience, but if you knew Reverend Craig, you know that he is kind of larger than life, and there are some things about him that precede him. One of the stories that's told that's become legend around here is that Mark Craig would walk into work with an index card of 3 things to do in a day. And then once he finished those 3 things, he would sit back behind his desk and read spy novels. I don't know if you can confirm or deny this, but I took a chance, and the day I finished Damascus Station, I ordered a copy, and I shipped it off to Mark Craig, saying, I heard you like spy novels. This is a good one. Happy reading. Have any of you read Damascus Station yet? Just show of hands. It is awesome. And okay, I just have to say, I sent it to my father-in-law as a gift. I would probably not listen to it on a road trip driving next to my father-in-law, if you know what I mean. But I am so thrilled to be here this evening and introduce to you David McCloskey for a couple reasons. First of all, David is just a super interesting human being. This is his first, there he is, very GQ photograph. You can see him just right below the photo as well. The resemblance is striking. David is a very interesting human being. In fact, you may have seen he and his wife in the centerfold spread of D Magazine with the headline, Dallas's Most Interesting Couple. This is David's first novel. He has gone all in on a novel writing venture, but this was not his first rodeo. In fact, David left college to pursue a career in the CIA. And if you know anybody who's interviewed at the CIA, you know that the ability to pass the lie detector test and the polygraph should give them reverence alone. But at the CIA, David was an analyst and he specialized in the Middle East. He did briefings with the presidents and he met with Arab royalty and specialized in the Middle East. So everything that you read and hear David speak about tonight comes from that stint at the CIA. And then following his time in Langley, he pursued a career with McKinsey Consulting. He and his wife, Abby, both did graduate work at Johns Hopkins. Abby is an economist who writes frequently for the Dallas Morning News. They moved to Dallas to be in the middle of the country, and now they have 3 wonderful children, and Dallas has become their home. But I'm thrilled to introduce David to you tonight because David and I went to the same school. David and I went to Wheaton College up in Chicago, and David and Abby were both 2 years ahead of me, but like 10 years cooler. I became a pastor, he worked at the CIA, then McKinsey, then writes spy novels. You can see the divergence, but Abby and David had become good friends to Ryan and me, and we are just thrilled to welcome David and Damascus Station to HPUMC. So will you bow your heads and pray with me? God, I'm so grateful that you gave us minds to think. Lord, that when we are creative, we reflect your creativity. And Lord, I'm grateful for this book and for David's mind and for the ways that he uses story to portray the complex reality of what's happening in the world. I pray, Lord, that as we listen to David speak and as we read and engage with this story, would you give us compassion for the things that break your heart? Would you help us find kindred spirits in these characters so that we might realize that our brothers and sisters in Damascus are not that much different than we are? And Lord, would you let us have a good time tonight? Let us laugh. Let us grow closer to each other and closer to you. And Lord, we praise you for David. Amen. All right, let's welcome David out.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay? Everyone hear me? Okay. Well, thank you, Hannah, for that very warm and kind introduction, and thank you so much for having me here tonight to speak with you all about the CIA, my book, Syria, the Middle East. As Hannah mentioned, I spent a little more than 6 years working at the CIA, and my book, which obviously is very much about that, came out in October, and so I've had a lot of opportunities to speak with a whole bunch of different types of groups about, the agency and my background and experience. And I've been up to Frisco to talk with ladies' book clubs and tennis clubs, and I've spoken with McKinsey consultants about it and groups like you. And one of the things that became very apparent to me really early on was that the secret world actually is pretty secretive. It's a bit of a black box. And even very well-informed, knowledgeable people just don't really interact with it much, and so they don't really understand how it works. And I have to admit that even standing in front of you here tonight, with the book having been out several months now and having done a number of these, it's still strange for me as someone who comes out of that world to be talking about my experiences there and what it was like and what happened, and to have a book out that talks about it. No less because Hannah did not fill out the Freedom of Information Act request that I asked her to for these remarks tonight. So you're going to get the full, unvarnished take, like it or not. So tonight, what I thought I would do is I'd just kind of, through some of my experiences and through the novel, really try to crack open what that secret world is really like, what it is, what it's not, why I think the Central Intelligence Agency is actually a really important place, and some of the big challenges that I see facing it ahead. But to start, a little bit about me, just kind of building off of bio that Hannah shared. So I was pretty new, or pretty young, to join the CIA. I took my first polygraph when I was 19. I was an undergrad in school, and the guy who ran at the time the Middle East analytic shop inside the CIA was an alum of my undergrad institution, Wheaton College, which is a small liberal arts Protestant college in the Midwest. And when I saw that the CIA was coming through, up until that point, most of my business experience had been as a cashier at Wendy's in high school. And so, I kind of looked at the CIA and I thought, this would be a step up, and I'm interested. I was an international relations major. I was interested in traveling and learning more about the world. And I think like a lot of, pretty young people, you kind of look at something like that and say, well, they'll never let me in, but I've got nothing to lose by applying. And it turns out that if you go to a small liberal arts Protestant school outside of Chicago, one thing that you tend to be pretty good at is passing polygraphs. You haven't really done anything wrong, but then you also have the appropriate kind of base load of guilt that comes along with telling the truth, and so it's a perfect way to get in. And so I passed. I went through the whole. Even as a 19-year-old, you go through the whole background investigation, and they sent people in literally dark trench coats, went around my neighborhood and spoke with neighbors, and asked them weird questions about if I'd thrown parties when I was in high school, and talked with all my friends, and you do the whole gamut of stuff, and I somehow got in, and I was beyond thrilled. So I did 2 summers there as an intern. The first summer was 2006. It was there was a war for 34 days between Israel and a group in Lebanon called Hezbollah that happened that summer. And I ended up, on a team that was working on that. And then I came back the next summer after my junior year and did another summer working on Syria. And that was the summer right before the Israelis blew up Syria's nuclear reactor that they were building out in the eastern desert. And so these 2 experiences as a very young person, I just thought this is beyond cool. I mean, I had, colleagues and classmates who were, pushing paper somewhere, and I was doing all this interesting stuff, and I thought, this is amazing, I want to do this. So I came back, I joined full-time in 2008. I did most of my work, almost all my work, on Syria. I did a little bit of time in our counterterrorism center. At the time, there were terrorist groups that would send people through Syria into Iraq to try to kill our soldiers and kill Iraqi civilians, and so I spent a little bit of time working on a team that was trying to stop those people. But for the most part, what I did was I worked on Syria. I worked on its politics. I worked on its economy. I worked on its, its society. And, for the first few years, what that meant was it was a relatively sleepy, second-tier country from the standpoint of Washington that did some bad things in the region but wasn't as important as Iraq or Iran. And that meant that it was a pretty small team, and it was interesting to me. I really enjoyed the work, but that all started to change and become much more, it became a much more of just a sort of a burning fire in 2011 when the Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening or the Arab Winter, whatever you want to call it, began. And there were protests that roiled through the region. Syria was not immune, and by the middle of 2011, it was clear that everything in that country had changed. I ended up having, and you can see from some of the pictures here, I think I'm going to flip to a slide here that describes with some numbers what happened in that country and what I watched occur. But, this was a place, and this is be a theme of my book and the talk tonight, is this is a place that had real people in it who lived through a conflict that destroyed their entire world and their entire country. These stats up here are really hard, I think, for us to kind of comprehend. But as a young man watching this country, I had lived there for a while before the war started. I had traveled in and out. I had been working on it my entire adult life up to that point, with the exception of the Wendy's experience, which we talked about. And, to watch a place so fully implode and destroy itself was a really emotionally racking experience for me as a young man, and continues to be one for me today. We are now at a place in Syria where the poverty rate is literally like 80 to 90%, unimaginable number for us. 1 in 50 Syrians have died in the conflict. A quarter of them are receiving food aid from the World Food Program every month. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, have been disappeared into interrogation centers, never to be seen again. 1 in 2, I think the stat is the most shocking to me, 1 in 2 Syrians have been displaced internally or actually fled the country over the course of the war. And 1 in 3 Syrian homes all around have been destroyed. About half of the basic infrastructure of the country has been totally wrecked. And I worked on this conflict as it kind of went from, peaceful uprising initially, with a group of people in Syria who were clamoring for something like dignity. They wanted economic dignity. They wanted more political freedoms. They wanted basic things that all of us take for granted. And what quickly happened in the context of a country like Syria was that spiraled into an insurgency. The state pushed back. There was a lot of violence, and it spiraled into eventually a civil war that led to this. In 2014, I left the CIA, and I ended up having a period of a few months in between when I left and when I was going to start a new job here in Dallas. And at the time, we didn't have any kids. I was married, but my wife was working. She was in grad school. I had a lot of free time on my hands, and I was really struggling to deal with this. And I started to write. I sat down every day for about 7-8 hours sometimes, and I would just go to the same coffee shop and I would write, usually in a notebook. I would do character sketches of Syrians that I had known. I would write stories. Some were real and some were not. But I really found that the way that I was working through this was to write it down. And so I ended up that summer writing about 100,000 words, which is pretty close to a book length. And at the time, I had no intention that anyone would ever read it, much less buy it. My wife read it, and that was about it. But it had become this kind of way for me to process what I had seen and lived through. I put it in a drawer, quite literally, and did this job consulting here for McKinsey in Dallas for about 5 years, and then had an opportunity for a whole bunch of different reasons to kind of step back in and dust the manuscript off and see, 5 years on, what did I think about it? And it's funny because I actually pulled the physical thing out, took it to a coffee shop, and over a few days read it. And I thought, this is absolutely terrible. This is abysmal. It was underwritten in places and overwritten in others. It turns out if you actually want to write a book, you need to have a plot. Plot's helpful. And it didn't have that. It was just sort of this meandering thing. But I remembered that feeling of sitting down in the chair and writing and how it had helped me to work through this. And so I wanted to recapture some of that. So I kind of put the old manuscript aside and said, I'm going to start over. And the process of starting over led to the creation of my book, Damascus Station. Damascus Station it's a spy novel, obviously. It's set in the early years of the Syrian civil war. It's not really, I don't specify it in the book, but it's 2011 to 2013, which is the kind of core of the time that I was working on the war. It's about a CIA case officer named Sam and his Syrian recruit Miriam, who break one of the kind of foremost rules of espionage and follow into a forbidden relationship. Hence why Hannah didn't want to listen to it out loud with her parents in the car. And they go into Damascus to hunt down the killer of another CIA officer, and in the process of that, really come face to face with the conflict and the tension and the passion in their own relationship, as well as into direct conflict with a pair of fairly brutal Syrian brothers who are guarding a very dark secret at the heart of the Syrian regime. And so this book ended up becoming, it's about espionage, certainly, but it's also about love, it's about loyalty, it's about betrayal. And I think because of the setting and what that meant to me, it's also about what does it mean to be a human in the middle of a very inhuman conflict. And as I wrote it, there were, I think in my mind, kind of two really important things that I wanted to get right. The first was I wanted to do justice by Syria in some way. I wanted to get Syria right. And for me, that meant that I wanted to punch holes, or windows rather, into all sides of the conflict. This conflict was often portrayed in the Western press as pretty straightforward in some ways. Good guys, bad guys. It wasn't. There were a lot of different sides to this war, a lot of different perspectives on it. Syrians reacted very differently to the stimulus of the conflict, depending on their ethnic background, their religious background, their job, the region they lived in, whether they lived in the country or the city, and the outcomes for individuals in Syria were just vastly different over the course of the war. And so I really wanted the book to deal realistically with that. I also felt like a conflict like this makes, you have to balance, I think, or at least I wanted to balance, some sense of moral clarity in that there are good guys and bad guys in my book, but there's also a lot of moral ambiguity, which I think was true of the conflict as well. And so you had good guys who did really bad things, and the good guys in my book do bad things, they make mistakes. And then you have bad guys who also do good things, and that tension was something that I really wanted to explore, because to me, the Syrian war really epitomized it, and it made drawing these kind of clean lines very hard, but at the same time, you always wanted to struggle for some amount of moral clarity in the midst of what was going on. I also wanted this book, when you read it, I wanted you to feel like you're in Damascus. I wanted you to taste Damascus. I wanted you to feel, the dust on your feet. I wanted the smells of the city to come through, because it had meant so much to me as a young man to live there. I really wanted that to come through in the book, for it to, the real streets of Damascus are mentioned, its real neighborhoods. The city in the first years of that war went through such a transformation. I wanted the reader to really live through that. And then the book also, at particular points, I wanted to kind of puncture the plot with real stuff that happened in the middle of the war. And I don't think it's giving too much away, but there's a scene in my book where the U.S. Embassy in Damascus is actually overrun by a mob of pro-regime demonstrators. And in the book, they throw a whole bunch of rotten fruit in, and someone climbs over the no-climb wall, which is actually what it was called, but got right over it. And then they get up to the top of the chancery, and they pull the American flag down, and they raise the Syrian flag, and they destroy the air conditioner in the middle of July in Damascus. And a few characters in the book have some choice words for what that means. But that actually happened. I distinctly remember, I wasn't there at the time, but colleagues who I had served with still were. And they were so angry because literally they took 2x4s and bats up to the roof and wrecked the air conditioner and hauled pieces off. And it took weeks to get it fixed. And it was, incredibly hot that summer. And so that actually, that happened in real life. There's an attack with sarin gas in my novel, which has unfortunately all too real precedent on the Syrian battlefield. I think we here in the States kind of saw little snippets of this throughout the war, but the Assad regime used sarin gas on its own people hundreds of times in the middle of the conflict. And there was one particularly impactful, there were many, but one particularly impactful use of it early on in August of 2013, when the regime may have killed upwards of 1,000 people in a neighborhood just outside the capital. And so I wanted the reality of that, that brutality in some ways to kind of come through in the book. And so there are scenes in the book that deal with that. There's also scenes in the book that reference off camera these massacres that took place. Syria is a very diverse ethnic and religious kind of composite. So that created its own weird, and bloody dynamic during the war. And so I wanted to bring to life the way that some of my characters kind of react to seeing those massacres happen. There's also a bomb attack or a bombing in the book that takes place essentially in the Syrian equivalent of the West Wing, probably in the Situation Room, where a whole bunch of different characters are in a meeting and a bomb goes off. It's been planted under the table, and President Assad is there, and a whole bunch of his senior advisors are. Essentially, it was the equivalent of a bomb literally going off in the Situation Room, when the president's there. And that actually happened, with the exception of Assad not being there. But in July of 2012, rebels literally smuggled a bomb into the middle of a Syrian security facility and detonated it in the middle of the meeting. And they killed the defense minister, they killed Assad's brother-in-law, they killed the Syrian equivalent of the CIA, they killed the Syrian equivalent of the DNI, the interior minister, a whole bunch of people. And I put Assad in there in my book because I felt like he sort of richly deserved a near-death experience, and I wanted him to have one. So I got to play around with that a little bit. But I wanted the book, to kind of reflect the reality of the war. The other thing I wanted the book to do, and we'll talk about this more, is that I wanted the book to reflect the real, as much as I could, the real CIA. One of the things that was probably most disappointing to me, actually, when I became an intern at the CIA was after about 2 days at Langley, you kind of look around and you say, this isn't like any of the spy novels. This is, or movies at all. This is, in some respects, a little bit less cool. But as I thought about it more, I really thought there was great grist in the real business of intelligence, in the real work of a CIA case officer or an analyst, to tell a really riveting story that would deal pretty realistically with the actual business of Langley and the business of intelligence, that would deal realistically with the trade craft. So my novel is not a book where, excuse me, where my protagonist is running around with a gun all the time, shooting people. He's running real intelligence operations, and I thought, that could be really cool to do in a book. And I think perhaps at the deepest level, what I was most interested in doing was kind of getting down to the deep stuff of the CIA. What is this place? What's the cultural code? What's the moral ethic of it? What is it actually like for the people who live there, or for who work there and who live in this business? And I was really interested in kind of bringing that to life through the eyes of my characters. So you're sitting there thinking, okay, he's got this book, it's about the CIA in Syria, and he's been in the business a little bit, so he kind of knows what he's talking about, but he said he's an analyst. What does that mean? What was that guy actually doing at the CIA? And what does the CIA actually do? Because again, that black box thing from earlier, I think, our views of this we're all sort of at a distance for the most part. So what is this place actually like? I would submit that most of us come to intelligence or spying or the CIA through the looking glass of Hollywood. I would guess. It is true that spy fiction, spytainment, as a recent book calls it, is really big business. Couple examples. You read books by guys like Brad Thor or Daniel Silva or Jack Carr. They've got CIA protagonists. They are on the New York Times bestseller list every year, usually in the #1 spot. Jack Ryan, the streaming series on Amazon, to say nothing of the books, was I think at the time, the most viewed show on Amazon. And between Clancy and Ludlum, who wrote the Jason Bourne series, those guys have sold over 500 million with a B copies of their books. And so it is huge, huge business. And like I was saying earlier, when you look at the depictions of the agency in these films and in these books, I read and watch all of this stuff, and it is a ton of fun. It is nowhere close to what actually happens. It's nowhere close, which is kind of a shame, but it's true. And, in most of these depictions, you have what I would kind of call a superhero spy. You've got somebody who's usually well-armed. They're very handsome and they're very attractive, maybe with the exception of the Philip Seymour Hoffman character up here. But, they're running around the U.S., they're shooting people. There's no regard for any kind of bureaucracy or any regulation. They're doing crazy stuff, and it's wonderfully entertaining. But again, it's just not at all what the place is like. And so when I talk with groups like this about, what is the CIA? I think the best way I can describe it is that the CIA is a uniquely bipolar organization, okay? On the one hand, it is just as mundane as a large Fortune 500 bureaucracy, right? Any big company based here in Dallas. It's a little bit quirkier because it's secretive and it's the government, but on the one side you've got this kind of mundane, quirky, big bureaucracy thing going on. On the other hand, the actual daily business of the CIA is far more high stakes and far more exceptional, in my humble opinion. And so to actually understand it, you have to hold both of those thoughts in your head at the same time. And I will tell you, oftentimes, when I was working there, those two thoughts would be going through your head in the same meeting. You're like, I can't believe this about the way the business works or the bureaucracy, and I can't believe we're doing this amazing operation. Those two things you sort of have to hold them in your mind at the same time. So on the mundane side, it's a big bureaucracy. Managers in big bureaucracies send a lot of email and they go to a lot of meetings. At the CIA, we call it cable traffic, which is sort of fancy way of saying secret email, but mid and upper level managers at the CIA spend a lot of time writing notes back and forth to each other. It takes up a huge amount of the job. There is a gift shop at the CIA. So I've been in many businesses around Dallas. Southwest Airlines has a gift shop, AT&T has a gift shop, Toyota has a gift shop, the CIA has a gift shop. These are all real things that you can buy there. I won't belabor all of these. Some of them are probably very expected. But I will say that maybe not the thongs, but everything else could be expected. The luggage, even as a very young person, who probably didn't have I was much dumber back then than I am now. I remember thinking that luggage was a really bad idea, because it literally has it says CIA on it. So if you're going to travel overseas, and when I joined in 2006, there wasn't a little warning label there, like you just had to be smart about it. But then when I came back full time, they had actually put someone taped a little card up below the luggage that said, basically, in this is a more direct way of putting it, it said, don't buy this if you work here, essentially, is what it said. And you could never travel with it, obviously. So there's a gift shop with a whole bunch of really, weird and crazy stuff that you can buy. My mother got a CIA ornament every year for Christmas for me when I worked there. Like a lot of big businesses, there are very sort of Byzantine processes for travel and expenses. One story on this is that in the early kind of Obama years, so this is probably 2009 or 2010, there was an effort made for the CIA to spend less money. And of course, like any big business, the first place you go is to the travel budget. And prior to this, if I went to Tel Aviv or Amman or Damascus or Riyadh, if I went to the region from DC, it would automatically be business class travel, rightly or wrongly. And what ended up happening was a new rule was instituted, an agency regulation, that came to be known as the 13-hour rule, which was if your flight is under 13 hours, including the layovers, no business class at all. Now, I'm relatively tall, and I was more disappointed about that than others. And I came to find out, and I still never reveal who my source is for this, even though I'm out of the business, that there was a waiver that you could obtain to travel on a business class ticket that was under 13 hours. It came to be known as the leg waiver. And what it was you went downstairs to the doctors, and it was always kind of a strange thing. There's literally doctors at the CIA. It's called the Office of Medical Services, and you never really wanted to go there, but sometimes you had to. And so I went down there, and a doctor looked at me, and he sort of had me come over here, and he weighed me. He took my height, and then he measured from my knee to my ankle and my knee to my hip. And then he took all those numbers, he put it in some program and probably skewered it with like chicken entrails or whatever, and out comes a number that says you're a certain percentile. And if you're above this percentile, you get the leg waiver, and if you're below, you don't. And I got it because I have really long legs and I'm almost 6'5". And I can safely say that I've never seen more hateful looks from another human than when I got on a flight to Amman, Jordan, a few weeks later with colleagues, and I got on first and sat down in business class, and 5 people that I knew walked right past me into steerage for like a 12-hour and 57-minute flight to Amman, Jordan. The fact that the agency is not just a big place, but also a secretive government place adds some additional wrinkles of inanity to the whole thing. And one of my favorite memories of this is that you cannot buy stuff for parties with taxpayer money. Okay, you can't buy alcohol, you can't buy food. If you're going to have a CIA Christmas party, that's coming out of the team's pocket. And so what this means is that I don't know if you might have a view of okay, CIA Christmas party is a bunch of people in tuxedos sipping martinis at some really cool place in D.C. No, it's a community center in Langley, Virginia, where everyone has made the food. And so you would have, it's like a church potluck, but a little bit sadder. And you'd have literally your manager is, making a casserole, this person that's, 3 steps above you in the organization, and involved in the Bin Laden raid is making casserole for Christmas. So you have these kind of weird things that become normal when you're working in the secret world. But then on the kind of exceptional side of the coin, if all of those things are mundane and quirky, the mission means that the stakes are much, much higher. And the CIA really is in the very deadly, serious business of recruiting people to give us secrets that they shouldn't be giving us, of disrupting, terrorist networks and plots, and of providing information to U.S. policymakers that they need to make the best possible decisions. So all that weird stuff, it exists with the reality of the mission. So, and I'll share at a very high level some of the things that I can about either stuff that I participated in or saw to make that point. So, over the course of my time in the Counterterrorism Center and working on Near East stuff, there were literally dozens of human and technical operations that I saw with my own eyes and participated in that literally disrupted terrorist attacks from happening days before they did. I have literally in a room in the Langley basement watched real-time drone footage of us flying something over a hard target country's, what they thought was a secretive military facility. In real time, we're watching it. You can literally see the people, see the license plates, see everything. We know exactly where this place is. I know of operations in which CIA officers have gone into denied area countries under extremely elaborate cover to help find dead drop locations, so agents in those governments can provide us with documents and thumb drives that have secrets on them. And I know of bags of cash literally slipped to agents on a train, literally kicked over in a duffel bag after the agent gets out of prison, because the CIA keeps its promises and said we're gonna compensate you and your family for what happened, and here you go. We live up to our word. And so I say all that, in no way to paper over the very real warts and shortcomings of the place, of which there are many. But just to say that, I think most kind of corporate jobs, including the one I was just doing as a consultant, have analogs somewhere else. I don't really think that the CIA does. The exceptional nature of what CIA officers typically just call the mission is the reason why they put up with all the stuff, the gift shop and all the other crazy things that mark life in the secret world. And the really strange thing about the CIA, and this is something that I wanted to try to communicate through the eyes of my characters in the book, is that for an organization that's really dealing in deception, the currency of the place is truth, which is a bizarre paradox, but it is absolutely true. And the moral code that has been developed over the decades to deal with, to achieve that mission, is all about telling the truth. And really the search for truth, I think, is the soul of what the CIA does. And it doesn't mean that the CIA always achieves that goal by any stretch of the imagination. But it means that we're always trying to, and that's the standard by which officers of the CIA are judged. And I'll give you a couple examples of this. One of the things that I was first taught when I joined as an analyst, like literally on day one of the training, is The whole point of this job is to speak truth to power. The whole point of this job is to look at the intelligence in an objective, fact-based, non-value-laden way and communicate what in the heck is actually going on here in Syria, why is it happening, and what does it mean to us, free from any political encumbrance whatsoever. Like, we're gonna report the facts straight. And it's amazing how rabid the analysts become over this, because I've literally been in meetings with directors, and I wouldn't do this. I have too much common sense now, but we have literally young analysts who will contradict the director in meetings because they know what's going on in their country, and the director says something wrong. They will literally step in and contradict that person, which I think is wonderful and the mark of a really healthy organization that tolerates and encourages that. Case officers, CIA case officers, the protagonist of my novel, Sam, is a case officer. His job is to find, spot, assess, develop, and recruit humans who work in foreign countries and who have access to information that we want. We kind of think of that job, I think, as, oh, these kind of people are professional liars and deceivers, and you can read your fair share of spy fiction where these people are kind of characterized as scumbags. And it is true that the job involves some amount of manipulation of another human being, but the thing that the CIA cares about most when they look at their case officers is, are they honest? Are they going to be honest with us about everything that is going on in this case and in their life and with their asset? Can we trust them? Do they have good judgment? And so the currency for a case officer, these guys and girls cannot survive unless Langley trusts them. And it is true that I think while CIA might tolerate kind of all manner of potential screw-ups on the part of its case officers and analysts, the one thing it will not tolerate is deception. That is the cardinal sin. And if case officers or analysts break that, they get tossed. So, we've talked a little bit about the CIA as a bipolar place, and I think one of the things that I'm struck by is just why is the CIA actually important? And maybe for many of us that's a blindingly obvious question to answer, but I think it maybe bears some examination of why does this place really matter to us as Americans, living in Dallas, away from DC. And I would argue that our national security really depends on a lot of different things. It depends on our geography, it depends on our culture, it depends on our industrial base, it depends on our military capacity, it depends on our people, you can go through the whole list of things. But it also depends on how we use information for advantage. Our ability to put the best possible information into the hands of the people in our government who make decisions, and to make sure that information is better than the information that Vladimir Putin has or Xi has in China, that matters a lot. And I think that's what the CIA and what intelligence agencies do. They help us to have an informational advantage over countries that want to do us harm, over groups that want to do us harm, and helps us to manage, what is an increasingly important aspect of national security and national power in the 21st century, which is, do I know more than you, or do I know something before you do? And I think actually you can see that in the lead up to the Russians' invasion of Ukraine, the most recent invasion in February, where the US intelligence community had pretty good information about what the Russians were doing, and it helped us to shape our response in advance of that invasion. So, intelligence agencies, to do that, they collect, they protect, and they verify information for national advantage. So, what are the big challenges ahead for the CIA? Now, I'm a recovering consultant, and what that means is, I was always told that when you summarize something or when you kind of get to the end of some presentation, there should always be three things. If there's two things, you didn't think about the problem hard enough. If there's four, you're overcomplicating it. So I'll leave you with three. I think the first big thing, and it's kind of a big umbrella word that can mean a lot of different things, but I'll use it anyway because I think it's helpful. It's cyber. And I define that here as tech breakthroughs that are empowering our adversaries and creating challenges for us specifically the CIA, as we think about collecting, protecting, and verifying information. So there's a tremendous cyber challenge in front of us in this century. It's already upon us. And when we think about collection, 6-7 years ago, the idea that a Russian bot farm outside of St. Petersburg or ransomware gangs affiliated with the Russian FSB would be, tremendously important collection targets. Like, it was there, but it wasn't in the same way that it is now. And there's a whole collection shift that is needing to happen on the part of the CIA to make sure that we're collecting on the right groups. There's also a tremendous amount of new information available today, what I'd call commercial intelligence or commercially available intelligence. So this isn't Twitter, it's not Facebook, it's not social media. It's stuff that companies and apps collect from us and then are packaged and can be sold. They can be sold to intelligence agencies, they can be sold to private equity firms. These are things like retail foot traffic, telco data, all manner of things like that. And the agency, the CIA and the intelligence community in particular, are not and have not been very good at collecting that, figuring out ways to buy it. As you can imagine, a lot of companies don't want to sell it to intelligence agencies. But there are a lot of use cases for it inside the world of intelligence. And it's really important that the CIA figures out, and broader intelligence community figure out a way to harness that information for a national advantage. On the protection side, I think we've all seen over the past 10 or 15 years how the sort of barrier between the digital world and the physical world is now not so much of a barrier. It's pretty permeable. Digital weapons can be used to affect actual infrastructure, be it industrial control systems, actuators that run everything inside water transmission systems, electrical systems, you name it. It's a tremendous threat, and it's one that is an incredible challenge that our intelligence agencies will have to be vigilant toward for the remainder of this century for sure. On a verification standpoint, one of the things that I think is most terrifying, which I'm going to share with you to sort of unburden myself a little bit, is if you think about something called deepfake technology. There are very powerful artificial intelligence algorithms that can create photos and videos and audio that are they look strikingly real. And we lived in a world in the past where it was somewhat easy to figure out if something was real or not. And we're sort of working into a world where that's not the case anymore. And it's not hard to imagine that for an intelligence agency, you don't have to be kind of an evil genius to think about how that could affect the outcome of an election or a business outcome. And from a tradecraft standpoint, it's extremely challenging when you think about just our officers overseas and the threats that they're exposed to. One more thought on the cyber side, and that's that in the past, most of the big tech breakthroughs that happened inside the government and leaked out to the private sector over time. You can think about the precursor to the internet that way. It's not so much the case anymore. It's now the case that a lot of these breakthroughs are happening outside the government, and the government is trying to get access to them. And we have a very, I think hostile is probably the right word, between Silicon Valley and Washington, and between our tech industrial base and our intelligence agencies. The relationship is not particularly fluid. This is not the case in Russia or in China, where for obvious reasons those countries have done a much better job of connecting those two spaces. And I think that is a challenge that we're going to have to overcome as a country if we want to make sure that we're harnessing the best from our tech companies and bringing it into our intelligence agencies. The second thing is there is a big, and this has been talked about, but big companies and bureaucracies move slowly, so I think it bears mentioning. We've spent the last 2 decades, the CIA, highly focused on wars against terrorist groups in the Middle East and Afghanistan. Our best people, our budgets, a lot of our time was spent focused on that. And that's not the case anymore, nor should it be, but there's a big shift that needs to happen away from that stuff into focusing much more on our near-peer adversaries in Russia and China, and making sure that we've got the right people, the right set of language, actual officers who speak these languages, who are brought up inside the CIA, make sure we have the right cadre of analysts, make sure we're funding everything appropriately. There's a tremendous shift that's underway there. And we've seen some good things over the past year with the advent of a China mission center at the CIA to kind of more focus on it more organizationally, but there's a big shift underway there that needs to be accelerated. And then, perhaps I think most close to home for many of us, certainly for me, that knowledge gap that and this is point 3, by the way. I worried that, this knowledge gap we talked about of, hey, it's sort of a black box inside the CIA and no one exactly knows what it does. I think that stepping into that knowledge gap is a kind of breed of very politicized and conspiratorial views of the CIA that are really quite threatening to it as an institution. And I think this runs the gamut across the political spectrum. You've got conspiracy theories about the deep state. You've got, on other sides, it was just sort of an unremitting focus on the evils of the CIA. It's an imperialist tool. You go back to the 50s and it's fomenting coups in Iran and Latin America. Today it's torturing people and rendering people and getting Iraq wrong and Afghanistan wrong. So you can kind of see, I think, the germs of this all over the place on our political spectrum. But I think that what this does is it really threatens the CIA by it reduces public trust in an institution that really needs public trust to function. I think it really saps the talent pool, or puts that at risk. It makes it less of an exciting career path. It makes it harder to keep people who are good. People retire early. And I really do worry that this kind of politicization weakens our national security by distorting or potentially distorting the information that our policymakers either receive or don't receive. And I think a great example of this is actually the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl in the 80s, when one of the biggest, there were many problems obviously in the response to that, but one of the biggest was that the Soviet political officials overseeing the disaster response browbeat and minimized the engineers who understood the scope and scale of the disaster unfolding in front of them, and they minimized that to the political officials in Moscow and the Kremlin. They didn't tell them how bad it was going to be because they were afraid of Moscow's response. And I think what that illustrates is that it's usually, or it can be, quite politically advantageous in the near term to do that with intelligence agencies or with sort of very objective fact-based information. But it's almost always disastrous and poisonous in the long run. And I think we can see kind of glimmers of that happening here. So I'll leave you with this. Top left there is the famous marble-floored lobby at CIA headquarters. And you probably have seen movies before where the protagonist is sort of walking with intent across the lobby in the morning, and the whole place is bustling and there's tons of people there. That's actually not true. It's too far away from the parking lots. And so no one, it's very empty. And it's actually a very, kind of contemplative, quiet place. On one side of the lobby, you have the memorial wall, which has all of the stars etched into the marble for each officer of the CIA that's died in the line of duty. There's a little book, a lambskin book that's in a case that juts out from the wall that has the names. Some of them are not in there because what they still did can't be seen or written down, but most of the names are in there. And then on the other side, we have the unofficial motto of the CIA, which is etched into marble right across from the wall. And it's from the Gospel of John. It's chapter 8, verse 32. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Well, I think that the CIA's currency is truth, no matter if it misses that mark sometime or not. And I think that truth is something that is really in very short supply right now. We see this in our political and cultural dysfunction, where solving complex problems or even trying to deal with something called truth is kind of increasingly spurned in favor of scoring points at the expense of the other side or some kind of tribalism. And I think that dynamic is really going to weaken the CIA, very much threatens to do so. It's going to make us less able to deal with the threats that the century is going to pose to our republic, and really to our way of life. And so my hope in speaking to you today is that you'll walk away with some better understanding of the CIA, both the good and the bad, and that understanding will better prepare you to hold the CIA accountable to that motto, which is, I think, telling the truth to our political leaders and ultimately to us. So thank you so much for having me. And I think we do have a few minutes for questions, which I'd be happy to take.
I just have to ask you, in your gift shop items, is that thong supposed to be a flip-flop? Or are you talking about women's underwear?
It's very classified. I'll share. It is, in fact, women's underwear. Yes, I think they also have sandals there, which is how I would have referred to. But yeah, I think they have both, actually. I know. Yes. So the question was, what made me leave the CIA after 6 years? It was a number of, like all big decisions, it was a number of different things. It was, I had a lot of fatigue after working on Syria, and I had been told that I was going to have to keep working on it for a long time, and I didn't really want to do that anymore. My wife and I wanted to get out of D.C. for a while, so I was, been back from Damascus for a while, and we were living in D.C., and we just kind of didn't want to be there anymore. And then I also, I've joked about it a number of times, but it's true. The last time I'd worked in an actual business was at Wendy's. And I was worried that I would get to a point in my career where I thought, I actually have no idea what it's like outside Langley. And so all those things conspired together, and I think I had good stories at the time for why Dallas, because we didn't really have family here, but we kind of threw a dart at the dartboard and ended up here. We love it.
Sir, what's your take on the Ukraine, what's happened there, and who's likely to win?
All right, yeah, I asked for softball questions, actually. So I will caveat by the fact that I did not study Mr. Putin or Russia at the CIA, so I'll give you my somewhat educated take, I guess. If you go back and read Putin's letter, it's actually on the website of the Russian presidency in English, and so everyone could read it tonight, although I think it's weird reading. He wrote a long letter last summer about his views on how Russia and Ukraine, and he goes back to the 7th century. He basically says that it's the same country, or that Ukraine is part of Russia and Russia's got its boot on Ukraine is probably the better way of putting it. There is a weird aspect of Russian political culture that is very much focused on the land and this sort of gathering of Russian land. And I think that he sees this as an effort to restore aspects of a kind of view of almost an imperialist Russia that have been lost over the past 20 or 30 years. And I think that he he obviously overestimated his military's ability to take Ukrainian land, but at the same time, I think that he is living inside a political system and an information system in which, no matter the outcome, he is able to declare victory inside Russia and have most Russians, believe that that's the case. And so I don't think he's in a position where he can really lose, which is unfortunate, but it won't matter so much what happens on the battlefield in Ukraine. What matters more is what's going on inside the Russian political system, and I think there I don't really see, a coup is always possible. I don't really think it's very likely. I think most of that stuff's overstated. I think his position at home is pretty strong, and he's likely to probably just die of some illness or in his bed.
Why were you placed with a team in Syria? Was there something in your background? Did you have language skills?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the CIA basically hires two different kinds of people. They hire people with technical expertise who have, they've been in this country forever. They did their PhD on it. They hire, and then that's one end. The other end is they hire young people who they're like, we can train this person up, and kind of teach them how to do the job and give them the language skills and all that. I was very much in that camp. So they literally, I was 19, so I didn't really have that much experience on anything, but I literally got a call from the person who's like, you're gonna work on Syria. And I said, okay, like, why? And they didn't have a reason. It was literally because they had an intern slot on the Syria team for someone coming in as, a first year or first summer undergrad, and they put me there. And then, like most things, I ended up doing a halfway decent job, I guess, and the people liked me there, and so they wanted me to come back, and it went from there. But it had nothing to do with my experiences leading up to the internship.
All right, we have another question back here.
I have two questions. First of all, how much battle did you do with CIA censors in getting your book published?
Well, so on my very last day at Langley, actually, I was led into a small office that would sort of recollect the vibes of a broom closet, and I sat down next to a woman who didn't look like she'd ever left that office, and she put a large stack of papers in front of me, and I had to sign them. And I stupidly, I'd been working there for many years, and I don't know why I asked this, but I said, can I take these with me? And she looked at me like, oh, honey, like, what's wrong with you? You can't take these. But she read a few of the pertinent ones to me. And one of them said, basically, from here on out until the day you're dead, amen, you're going to send everything to the CIA that you write, including, obviously, a novel about what I worked on at the CIA. And you know what? I had 300 footnotes in my novel when I sent it to them to show them where I got all the stuff from. I was careful with things that I knew wouldn't be accepted. And so it actually was a fairly quick process for me. They edited a few things, but the best part about it is that so I sent it to them in a normal kind of human-style Word document. It was like, here's a normal thing that you get. They sent it back to me, and it was a PDF. Everything was in caps, all caps. Everything was capitalized. And they literally black highlight through it. So I got this thing back, this like 300-page PDF, and it just has black highlighter through everything, and it has this kind of wonderful vibe, like it comes out of a time machine from 1964, But it was actually relatively straightforward, and I went back and forth with them on a few things, and it wasn't a big deal.
Secondly, right after 9/11, CIA agents were put into Afghanistan as combatants, were they not?
Yes, yeah. There were CIA teams inserted into Afghanistan almost, I think, in October they were in.
Were those mercenaries hide outside, or were they your colleagues? And if so, how were they trained?
All right, so one thing I'm gonna say on the verbiage, which I didn't touch on, but I think is always fun to talk about. So you referred to those officers as CIA agents. You will see in any spy, film, book, whatever, they would refer to me as a CIA agent, my colleagues as CIA agents. There's no such thing as an American CIA agent. It's officers or analysts. The agents are always the foreigners. Agents or assets, kind of used interchangeably, but just one side note on the verbiage. So my understanding, and this predates my time at the agency, is that the teams that were inserted into Afghanistan after 9/11 were part of what would now be called our Special Activities Center, which is essentially paramilitary officers. So they're not people like me, who are typically former, SEAL, Delta, special forces, special operations guys, who work for the CIA and operate under CIA authorities. Those people were inserted in small teams with local allies after 9/11 to essentially try to raise an anti-Taliban army, which is what they were doing. And it was very successful.
All right. Rod gets the last question.
This is kind of like asking you to prove a negative, but it's something about the effectiveness of the CIA. Can you cite examples in which CIA actions prevented crimes, disasters, crises?
I mean, I can't cite specific ones that I worked on, but I mean, so there was an attack that was being planned. I won't use specific dates or countries. The one that sticks out most vividly to me that I worked on that I still think about is there was a group in a country in the Middle East that we learned was going to go across the border of another country, and there was a specific village there. There were specific American troops there. There were specific Iraqis there, and we knew that they were going to go and kill the people there. And we knew the number of those people. We knew a lot of the names of those people, and we knew who they were. And because we had captured that information, we were able to eliminate the plotters of that terrorist group and the people who were going to carry it out about 3 or 4 days before they were going to conduct that attack. And I think that there are examples, particularly when you're talking about, terrorist groups in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, that, multiplied by hundreds is the kind of thing that's happened over the course of the war on terror. But that's an example that's probably been most resonant for me over the years, and just thinking about the impact that the agency can have.
When was the CIA? When was it formed? When was it born?
47, 1947.
What need was seen?
It was a formalization of, the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, had existed in wartime, and there were a whole kind of weird smattering of little attempts to kind of reconstitute that between 45 and 47 that didn't really go anywhere. But as it became clear that the Cold War was going to be a thing, there was, it was the first time really in American history that we'd seen the need to have a standing intelligence service to primarily counter the Soviet Union. So that's the genesis of it. It was in the National Security Act of 47. A whole bunch of different national security institutions got formed. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I don't know if I'm on or not. Chief Jackson maybe you're on. Am I on? Thank you guys for coming. David, thank you. Richard's going to say something real quick about buying David's books and getting them personalized upstairs in just a second. Next week, we have our illustrious and spiffy in-house book reviewer, Dana Harkey. So we'll see you all next week for Dana. Thank you.
Now, people have been getting books already. There are about 25 left. $20 cash or check. David will personalize them up under the vine on the first floor. So let's meet up there, those who want these last 25 books.